Hey, this is Maxwell 3000 Productions. I am Maxwell 3000. I want to welcome you back to Family Time. I'm with my partner in crime, my pops, Wayne Carter. How are you, pops?
Doing good, doing good. Cold weather up my way.
Yeah, cold weather here too. Want to say, I guess, happy Martin Luther King Jr. weekend to you. I think it's important we recognize him and the role he played. Not really, well, as a civil rights activist, and you can put a period there, but also as a theologian and a scholar, I think. So I certainly like to remember him. Um, you got any big plans for the week?
We started a men's prayer group on Monday mornings, and it's interesting you mentioned Martin Luther King Day, and there was some discussion about whether we ought to have it or not. I said I cannot think of a better way to honor Dr. King than to pray. So we're going to have a
Amen.
prayer meeting in his honor tomorrow.
Amen. Amen. That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, the boys and I, we will do the annual march with the city. It's kind of a partnership between the Chamber of Commerce and the NAACP and a few other folks, and that's an annual thing for us. So we'll be out there in the cold as we usually are this time of year. So good stuff. Good stuff. And we had a men's breakfast yesterday, and I wasn't really planning on saying anything about this, but I think it's worth saying. Um, it's important that we remember these days and we remember these people so that we remember history. And it's really surprising to me the perspective of the younger generation on history. We had, like I said, had a men's breakfast, and we just kind of had a round table around the theme of civil rights, being that it was Dr. King's weekend. And the prompt question, one of the prompt questions was, "What does civil rights mean to you?" And we had guys that, guys older than you to a guy younger than me that's about 27. You know, so a lot of different perspectives in there. Um, and I was one of the younger guys, and kind of got to me, and I went all nerdy on them, and I started about talking about John Locke and 1690 and the natural rights of man and all that stuff. You know what I mean? And everybody was looking at me crazy. Um, but then got to the younger guy and kind of asked him, what civil rights means to him, and this was a black gentleman, and he said, I don't really know what it means to me. I really don't know what it means, you know. And you know, not even 100 years ago, this was going on, and it wasn't the beginning of the struggle for the rights of humanity. Right? We can go back to 1690. We can go back further than that. If we wanted to, we can go back to the Hebrews and the Egyptians if we wanted to.
I was
Right?
thinking that you could go back to the fall of Adam and Eve and that story in Genesis. Absolutely.
Yeah. So it didn't start there, but we need to remember that, and particularly in our country's history, as well as other things that's happened as far as world history, and how things has progressed, and kind of the experiences we know about it. So I just found it really striking that that was his answer, and I thought to myself, his perspective is just as valid as my perspective. And if there's a failing in there, it's on our society, our modern society, our civilized society, our democratic society. We have failed somewhere in that. Maybe he's got some responsibility in it. Don't get me wrong, but we have failed in that. What do you think about that? Am I?
Well, part of of that conversation has to go back to our public education. There was a time in my life where there was a requirement to have civics class, a requirement.
That
I don't know,
requirement was in effect. I had to have that to graduate as well. Yeah.
and I don't know what they taught in civics in your. I should when you were in school, and even what they do now. Um, but the idea of everybody being treated equally when it comes to what we would call civil rights and defining civil rights. So I'm surprised at the people I talk to that don't know what a civil right is. And a right is something that you have, and I'm talking about the civil rights from our country, not necessarily biblical or world, but a right is something that you have in our country, United States of America, by being a citizen. And it's a right is something that you can't take away. I can give it away, I can waive it, but the government can't take it away. That right has been also established, whereas in a person who is inside the boundaries of our country have certain inalienable rights, and inalienable means you're born with them. And so those are the things that we don't realize that. And part of those rights are, in my mind, fundamental. But I'm a lawyer by trade, and I'm a criminal lawyer by trade, and so those are there for me. But a fundamental right is for me to be free in my house, to be freedom in my house. That the government cannot come into my house without a warrant signed by a judge that shows some sort of probable cause that a crime is being committed. That's a fundamental right.
We think about that as a right to privacy, right?
Correct. Correct. The right to be free in my person, to not, unless an officer, or I'll say the government, sees me commit a crime or has some reasonable suspicion that I am committing a crime or about to commit the crime, not to be stopped, not to be bothered, not to be harassed. Those are the kind of civil rights that we have in our country that other countries don't necessarily have. And of course, those are in the forefront now in the news, and that, obviously on my mind. But those are the
Yeah, I
kind
think they're on everybody's mind.
those are the kind of things that Dr. King fought for. Those are the kind of things that as a black man, he didn't necessarily have everywhere he went.
Yeah, and gosh, I didn't plan this, but this seems like some good stuff, and it's definitely important stuff. Let's go back a little bit, and when we're talking about rights, and you said civil rights, and so that kind of putting that civil rights on it maybe limits it to the jurisdiction of our government. Did I kind of hear that correctly?
Yeah, yeah.
But so the same civil rights might not be comparable from here to another country, right?
Right.
Okay. And we can have those big extreme examples of maybe communist China or totalitarian Korea, right? Or Russia, even, right? Now, talk to me about the difference between that and a natural right, and kind of how those play together in the foundation of our country. Well, I hope I'm not taking you off guard here. I know we didn't plan this.
No, but the natural right, in my mind, are those philosophical things that come up. The civil rights I mentioned are specific, articulable things. The natural rights are rights that we consider, and go back to Locke and some of those guys. When you say a right to life, I have a right to breathe. I have a right to be. The right of liberty. That word liberty means I have some say into what happens around me and in my government and uh, my surroundings. And there is a right, I think, of seeking God or having God sought you to respond to that. Again, I can't put a finger on that, but I think that as a right that we all have. Now, whether we exercise that right, that's a whole different ballgame. But I think we have a right to do that.
And so you just paraphrase what Jefferson wrote, right? Man is endowed with certain inalienable rights: the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right?
Yeah.
Now you said the kind of the pursuit of God or responding to God's love. And I would agree with you in that, and I would almost say that all of those rights are a response to God. But that can be a different kind of theological discussion than maybe what we're talking about here when we're talking about nation building. I think because it's important for us as well to be tolerant as well. Don't you think that was a founding principle that is included in those rights, that all men were endowed in certain inalienable rights? What do you think about that?
Yeah, and for me that goes back to the understanding of God. What you just said. If I am, at least my comprehension of God, then I'm going to be tolerant of yours, and my comprehension of God, I'm going to put your needs first over mine. So absolutely, yeah.
Right. That's interesting. That's interesting. I think we need to. I think it'd be good for us to dive into that more. Maybe if we, for both of us to have a little bit more preparation and guide that conversation better, because I think that there is a lack of education um, across the general public about some of these fundamental things. And we can get into a lot of reasons, the causes for that. But I think it's important that we at least try, each one teach one, right? That we that have an understanding do our best to communicate it to others.
Yeah, I don't want to belabor that unless you want to belabor it, but fundamentally, my thought process, my idea is that the responsibility of educating my children is mine.
Yeah, yeah. And I agree with that as well. But I do think I think public education is important to a democracy, and that's a whole nother line of conversation as well.
Yeah,
Well,
we could go to Aristotle on that, but
yeah,
I agree with
yeah. So let's get back into your life a little bit. So last time we spoke, you were telling me about your experience in basic training in San Antonio, and you talked a little bit about learning the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And I guess I have an idea of what that is, but I never served in the military. I don't know exactly what that means as far as what you would have been taught regarding the Uniform Code of Military Justice, but it's kind of been a popular topic here recently. So give me a very brief synopsis of what you're talking about when you're talking about the Uniform Code of Military Justice and kind of the main points of that.
Well, just by the nature of the term, you understand it pertains to the military, and being a part of the military, you actually are giving up some of your civil rights to be part of the military, and because that is necessary for the discipline necessary to be able to have a military that is operative. And when somebody tells you to do something as a civilian, you don't really necessarily have to do it. But if somebody gives you a lawful order in the military, you have an obligation to follow that lawful order, and that goes fundamentally to the idea of the combat soldier. If you're in that situation and you're ordered to do something, there's no time for discussion in those situations. You have to respond, and I have to depend upon you to respond. The people around you on your team have to depend on you to respond. So it's a necessary thing in the military to have laws that would violate your civil rights.
So, and it's just so if I am understanding this, and maybe I'm not understanding this at all, but so it goes back to our previous conversation as far as these rights, right? We, in this country, we have codified these rights into laws to be applied equally across the citizenship. Is that correct?
As far as our civil rights, yes.
Our civil rights, yes, that's what I'm saying. And so that's the big deal of a right. The king does not make the laws, or the king does not rule the government. The laws rule the government or the people. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, the people rule. The people is the Constitution.
Well, the people
We the
create the
people.
law. The
Right.
people create the law, but there is no one above the law. There's no king above the law. The rulers, the statesmen, Congress, representatives, and Senate, they are not above the law. The law is applied to all citizens equally.
Yes,
It's
and
supposed to
in
be.
my mind, especially to those folks.
Yeah. So, but you give up some of those rights in your service to the military. So, is this uniform code of military justice? Is that the laws for the military
Correct.
individuals? Basically, that's your codification of the laws.
Yeah.
Okay. Um. All right. And so I don't want you to get into a political conversation here. But if you could you break down for me kind of why that conversation is in the media now and how it's applied in those ways?
Well, the discussion that's been going on a lot in the last several months has been the very simple concept that a person in the military has to obey a lawful order. The question then becomes, what is a lawful order? Now, there are things called rules of law, rules of war, and I'll give you a real simple example of that. Personal experience. We when we were dispersing all the units during the desert, during Desert Shield, before it became storm in Saudi Arabia, we inadvertently placed a MASH unit, a mobile army surgical hospital unit, next to a fuel dump where people, where fuel is stored. Well, that is a violation of the rules of war under the Geneva Convention. And so once we noticed that, we had to move them, and we moved them because we were in violation. That would not necessarily be a rule that the civilian would have to worry about.
Okay. Okay. What would be an example of an unlawful order?
Well, the best example that I can think of goes back to Lieutenant Calley, which was a situation that happened in Vietnam. It was a big thing back in the '60s, and he gave. This is a version of it. There are all sorts of different versions of how far up the ladder it went, but he's the guy that took the the blame for what happened, but supposedly gave order to kill civilians, and that's a violation of the rules of war. And
And when you're talking about the rules of war, you're talking about the Geneva Convention as the international laws.
that is it, yes. But in addition to that, we as in the United States has other rules of war that are a lot more strict in a lot of ways than the Geneva Convention.
And how does that? How does the Uniform Code of Military Justice apply to retired veterans, honorably discharged, with all their rights and entitlements intact?
Well, there's a different standard for somebody that has just been a veteran and served, and somebody that is retired, drawing a pension. So if
Right.
you're retired like myself, you know, uh, even after I'm retired, I am subject to the Uniform Code of Military Justice, uh, some standards. Well, I'll give you an example. Last night, I went to a black tie event at the museum here in Cleveland, fundraiser. Uh, my tuxedo no longer fits, gotten a little heavier. And so I mentioned it to somebody, I forget who, may have been Lisa. But they said, well, why don't you wear your dress uniform? And I said, well, I could wear my dress uniform, and I probably would not have a problem. But I don't think, and I may change my mind tomorrow, but because I now have a beard, I don't feel comfortable wearing my dress uniform, because in my day you had to have a haircut and not shaved and that kind of stuff when you were in military uniform. So in my mind, I would be violating the Uniform Code of Military Justice by doing that. There's some discussion that maybe that's not true, but at least in my mind, I think it is. And so
Yeah.
that's a very simple example.
That's pretty interesting to me as well. And I guess just because of the hotbed atmosphere, um, it's relevant in our conversation. Anything else you want to add about that?
Well, I could get into a whole lot of stuff, but you don't want me to get political.
Well, I mean, if you want to, I mean, that's fine. I didn't want to put you on the spot, and like I said, we didn't prepare for this. So if I was going to put you in that place, I'd give you a little heads up, I guess. But no, I mean, this is your platform. Say what you feel led or compelled to say.
Well, one of the things that has been come up now is retired naval officer who's now a senator in Arizona, and I guess some other folks, but are under threat of taking their pension because they expressed an opinion. Um, that that Uniform Code of Military Justice does not take away your right of freedom of speech. Now, if we were in combat and you gave me an order, you were my superior and you gave me an order, then I would have to do it if it was a legal order. But if it was not, then I would have the obligation to speak up and say, sir, that's in my view illegal order, and I will not carry that out. And so for someone to not speak up to an illegal order, in my view, is a violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice.
Okay, so and in this situation, there was a YouTube video made by the female, I think, congresswoman that made the video, and then Senator Mark Kelly participated in it, amongst some others, and they're all veterans or served in the military in some capacity. And from what I could gather, the video was basically advising, I guess, military personnel that they are under no obligation to follow an unlawful order. Is that correct?
That's
Is
my
that
understanding.
that's your understanding? So I assume I'm assuming now. I assume what they're referring to is the National Guard action that's taking place in side of American cities um, for different reasons. Some of the reasoning has been crime. Some of it has been unlawful protest. There's in a combination of both. Um, is that your understanding, or is this also applying to the ICE agents, or is that a separate discussion?
That's a separate discussion.
Okay, so this has to do with the National Guard for the
Actually,
most part.
I think it has more to do, if I understood it correctly, with the naval people shooting the boats coming up from Venezuela and our doing that kind of stuff.
Okay. So in that context, because you're probably right, um, what are they referring to, in your opinion, to be unlawful orders, or could be an unlawful order that would be given that they're advising people they don't have to follow?
Well, and I don't think they got specific about that. And some of the stuff that's happened, you would not know unless you were involved and know about the intelligence that was received and the information that they had before they gave the order. But hypothetically, if a, a military unit was ordered to fire on some other nation, and we're not at war with that nation, there's no reason to fire on this nation, uh, then that would be an act of war on our part. And any military act of war has to be actually war has got to be declared by Congress. And secondly, if there's military action taken without the act of war, the Congress has to be advised. They have to have given their advice and consent for that to go forward. And so, without that having happened, it hypothetically could be an illegal order for me to order somebody to fire on another nation.
Okay, I hear that, but that's not a new discussion. We've talked about that with every president that I can remember in my lifetime. So why make this video now? You understand what I'm getting at?
Well, again, not privy to all the intelligence that's going on in those, and there's a whole lot of information that's out there that we don't know about. But it appears because of these Congress people are so concerned about this that there are executive orders given to do war type stuff without the advice and consent of Congress.
But that's not new to this administration, correct?
Well, I don't know that. Uh, to some extent, there may have been, but I would almost be willing to bet you that there is a select committee. I forget what they're called, but it's a bipartisan committee where the president, before he does anything like that, calls this committee in and gets them involved. And I think that's probably happened in most executives, even stuff we may not like or I think they were at least advised of it and for some reason consented to. Like the idea of the one that comes to my mind was when we went into Iraq, or Iran. And I don't know if you remember or not, but before we went into, after 9/11 and before we went in over it, there was a thing called the oh, that it was the name forgets, but it was an act of Congress that gave the president extra
Patriot Act.
powers, Patriot Act,
Patriot Act.
which was sort of funny, at least in my mind, a Patriot Act, because it was absolutely the opposite of Patriots.
They also gave them access to all our bank information and a lot of that stuff too, right in that Patriot Act. Yeah.
So part of, but I'll say this: at least Congress was involved. Whether I like it or not, they were involved.
Well, and to be fair, there's also the situation with Barack Obama in Libya and the disposing of that regime being very similar to what kind of occurred with Maduro here recently. And so I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit, and you know that. I don't know if what some of these things we're seeing, not that it's not a problem, but it's not a new problem. It's not necessarily this administration problem. This has been precedented over the last 3 or 4 administrations. This type of unilateral action.
But again, my understanding that at least Congress has been in the conversation, and it's not been a single part of the government, a single branch of the government that's making that decision.
Okay, that's interesting too. Well, so let's leave that where it is, and let's get back to our conversation, kind of about your life, and just rewinding back to where we were. We started this conversation talking about your educational uniform code of military justice in basic training, and then last time we spoke, you were telling me about coming home and kind of getting married in a rush and getting ready to leave out to Biloxi to start your training as an air traffic controller, correct?
Right.
What was that like? What was that experience like? I remember you said you were living in kind of a bedroom community to Biloxi that was fairly close to the base. What was your commute like? What was your day like? Give me the day in the life of that.
It was actually pretty good looking back at it. I'll get up, before the sun and get in to report to duty, and then had class, uh, 8 or 9 hours, maybe longer. I don't remember how much, but after class, uh, occasionally would have an extra duty, but most of the time was released to go home. And
So about what time did you say you got till? What time you'd get off?
I'd say 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Nice, nice. And extra duty, what would that be?
Well, if I had to go, uh, they do kitchen KP at the dining facility, or maybe go clean up something, or do some other extra duty that that had to be done. That you're low man on the totem pole, so you go do that stuff.
Okay. Was there a class of y'all that it would be a group thing, or just I need a guy and it's your turn, or you were the low? There wasn't any peers amongst you in that.
It was never alone. My memory, and it wasn't that much, but there would be a group of us, and I don't remember. But that's been a long time ago. But what I remember is I just happened to be the wrong one that was left behind, and just, hey, you gonna go do it.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. And what were you learning? Tell me about air traffic controller school, what were the type of courses you were taking? I don't know anything about that. So enlighten me. Give me the crash course of what you remember.
Well, fundamentally, you want to keep airplanes in the sky from running into each other, and you do that by separation of either time or space, and space can be distance in miles or in altitudes. You can have somebody at the same spot, but one of them may be at 3,000 feet, the other one at 6,000 feet, or they may be separated by space. And so uh, that's the bigger picture. The other part of that is the ground control, the controlling the airport, taxiways, uh, making sure that somebody ain't trying to land when somebody's taking off. Keeping those things separated. And there are rules to do that. Weather was a big deal. Understanding, and we had a long time in weather class because understanding how planes work and lift and draw and that kind of stuff, it was important to know, and the procedures for all that. So yeah, I mean it was it was intense. It was intense. I think that's why they probably didn't give us a lot of other extra duties, is because it was intense. The class you were in was intense for 8 hours.
Hmm, hmm, hmm.
But they
That's
wanted it. Part of that, you find out later, is part of the training is to see if you can handle the pressure.
right. Yeah,
That's
that's
what
what I
you're
was.
going to be hitting when you go to work.
Yeah, yeah. I was thinking that might be a big part of it as well. Did you have any interest in it, or was it this is what I was assigned to, so I need to learn this job?
The latter, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Uh, it was a great job, particularly in the military, because when I got to my permanent duty station, uh, we not only had the military rules, but the FAA had rules that so we couldn't work more than 8 hours.
So you
Every
were under union rules.
yeah, sort of, yeah.
No.
But that was a safety issue, and you had to have so many days off. Uh, so those are FAA rules, not necessarily military rules.
Is that the idea of keeping you fresh, you mentally fresh and aware?
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. That was
Yeah.
a yeah. As far as the military, I think it's the best job to have for an enlisted guy.
Yeah. Yeah. That does seem pretty good. Um, well, what was home life like, and even before that, tell me what was the move like. So, did if I remember correctly, you had to go down a little earlier, and then my mother followed a few days later, or a week or two later, or something like
Well,
that.
I got there. Then Marie came down and sort of scoped out and got us a place to live, and and all the just kind of got it. And before we got married, and then she went back to Lebanon, and then when I had a pass, went up and got married.
Okay.
And then when we got married, she sort of had everything already set up
Yeah.
uh, for us to live, and we didn't take a lot of stuff. We knew we weren't going to be there long. We just, the place we rented had furniture. It was pretty much the clothes and personal items.
Okay. And how long were you down there?
I'm trying to remember, probably 5 or 6 months. It was a pretty good school, uh, and then once you left there and went to your permanent duty station, you had like a time frame. And I won't think a month or so of on the job training before they would leave you, not let you work, without somebody directly over your shoulder.
No. Huh. So the move down to Biloxi, or right there around Biloxi, that was in the summertime, though. That was in June.
Yeah,
No. It's a tough time to be in Mississippi.
Yeah, I remember going out running, and you could almost just see the heat wave. It was as if the humidity, and there was an old cat that lived. I mean, he'd come around our area. We wasn't our cat, but he'd come around, and the cat must have had asthma because that heavy duty, it was just breathing. You could hear it. So yeah, it was.
What was the trailer like? Surely you didn't have any kind of central heat and air. Did you have window units for the
Yeah,
AC?
it was
Did
a
it
window
have any
unit.
heat at all?
Uh, I don't really. I'm sure we had heat. I don't remember necessarily needing it, but yeah, there was a window air conditioner. It was comfortable enough. Uh, I said it was kind of neat looking back at it. We're on the out there on the bay where the I guess it was maybe the Biloxi River that flowed into the Gulf of Mexico, and it was probably a
Beautiful little
vacation
area.
spot. Yeah, yeah, it was pretty neat. There was, and the little community, if I remember, was called D'Aberville or something like that. But there was I mean, it was a rough looking spot where a lot of the fishermen have come in and but the guy that owned the place, it was close to us, made the best gumbo, uh, and he was. I don't really know what a Cajun is, but this guy he would the more he cooked, the more beer he drank, the more he spoke French.
Yeah.
And so we just and this had a good time. I did, and I think your mother did too. Go over and eat and time and enjoy him, and they were very nice to us. And we went to
And so that was the landlord? Is that
no, this is just a little restaurant.
okay? Just a restaurant that was closed. Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. And the fishermen would come in there, and because they had fresh seafood. I mean, right there. So it was. I think that's probably the first time I ever ate shrimp. And we went to the Aberville Baptist Church on Sundays when we were there. Um, like I said, I was 4 or 5 months, 6 months, something like that. But people were nice to us. I'll never forget one of my friends in the air traffic control school came home with us one weekend. Well, in the Aberville, and I never really fished in the ocean, and so he was from Texas, Gilbert de los Santos, great guy. And so we're on the pier fishing, and I catch something. Well, I pull that thing in, I'm fixing to grab it, and he grabs my hands, and no, that's got teeth. So
Yeah.
you got to be a little more careful of that, because back in home we never have no fish that bite back.
Yeah, you ain't catch no sharks over
No,
here in Old Hickory for sure. That's
yeah,
funny. That's funny.
that was pretty fun.
That is fun. So you were down there, you found you a church. What else was going on? What did y'all do with your time after work? I mean, you didn't have any kids yet. Were you involved in the community? How involved were you in the church? What was life
Well,
like with that?
I think your mother, if I remember, was probably a little more involved than I was, because I think at one point she might have sit in or played the piano for them, my memory. You have to ask her about that. I think she did. Um, she worked. She got a part-time job while we were down there, or full-time. She got a job, um, and well, afterward, there was a lot of homework. So I was studying a lot. When I got home, I'd get home and go run, uh, get something to eat, and pretty much study, and then get back up the next day and do it again.
Yeah. Was that was that just a continuation of kind of how you were doing at middle? Did you have to do a lot of homework at middle, or was that not as intense as this training course?
Now, I'll tell you, the military course, in my view, was a lot more intense. And of course, this is something I had no clue about.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
In a pretty compressed amount of time, probably.
Yeah.
Right.
We did have a weekend off. I think I may have mentioned this to you. Uh, we had a weekend off, and I don't know if Jim and Liberta came down that one or not. We had a couple weekends. Jim and Liberta came down. My mom and dad came at different times, and I forget who it was, but we ended up going to see the New Orleans Saints play a preseason game, and that was when Archie Manning was down there, and they were going to play they played the Jets, and I wanted to see Joe Namath. And but it's preseason game, so we're excited, and we're sitting up in the nosebleed section. Uh, and I think Namath may have played a couple of series the first quarter, and that was it. So that, it's preseason; they don't get hurt.
Yeah. So you mentioned that Grandma and Granddad, your folks came down and visited you one time. Is this where the story of Grandma and the crawfish come from? Tell me about that. Was this at your friend's
shrimp.
restaurant?
It was shrimp, and it was at that restaurant.
Okay.
That I just told you about. Yeah, and Mom and Dad had to have been to the ocean before because they lived in South Carolina. I would say they when I was born, but I don't ever remember going to an ocean before. And so I got to, I enjoyed the shrimp, and it was boiled shrimp. It was fresh out of the ocean. They'd boil it, put it on the table, and you had to peel it, get the tentacles off, and eat it, and drink a bunch of beer. Well, when Mom and Dad came down, we took them to this place, and they just dumped all this shrimp on us with the tentacles. And my mother looks at these and she says, "I ain't eating them bugs." and so I convinced her as long as I would peel them and give her she would try it, but she wasn't about to touch the scale and all that.
I wonder what she would think of crawfish. That's funny. Okay, so you get through that schooling, and like you said, that was a pretty intense time. Now, do I remember correctly, or did I maybe make this story up? Wasn't there a hurricane or something? While y'all were down, what hurricane? Wasn't it the pretty big one that came through down there?
Yeah, it was. I think it was Hurricane Carmen.
Yeah.
Camille had come through a year or two before we were there, but Carmen was coming through, and it was actually coming through about the time I finished up the school, and so Marie,
she went home, didn't she?
well, I was trying to think. Maybe we had another vehicle at that point. So I think her dad had given her this other vehicle, and so she left, and I was going to follow. I couldn't leave.
Right.
About permission, and I said, "Well, you need to go on. I'll just catch up with you." And so she went back up Tennessee, and my duty station was going to be in North Carolina, so that just wait for me up there. And what I remember about that when the hurricane was imminent, I just noticed all the birds flying north.
Mm.
All the ants and insects were going in the ground. Those insects and birds were a lot smarter than we were, so they knew to get the heck out of Dodge. But we stayed on base, and it was hurricane, I guess, proof as much as it could be, and it was enough inland that there was a lot of damage that done at Biloxi, but I don't remember. We just dug in, and said Camille had actually hit Biloxi a year or two before, and they still had a lot of damage. And Carmen ended up veering, I think, more toward New Orleans.
Hmm.
We didn't get directly hit with it, but at the time, you don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Um, had you experienced any weather event like that before? I don't know. Did y'all have, tornadoes are pretty regular occurrence in Middle Tennessee now. Do you remember dealing with tornadoes as a child or anything like that?
I remember hearing, tornado warnings, but actually having witnessed it, no.
Okay. Yeah. And what about the rain down there during that hurricane? Had you ever seen anything like that? And can you describe that to me?
Well, and like I said, we were pretty much in, concrete building when most of it hit. Uh, but my memory of hearing the rain hit was like in waves of it. It seemed like.
Hmm. Hmm.
But that's been a long time ago, Max.
Yeah, I understand. I understand. That's interesting though, and I've um I've experienced some weather events, tornadoes, and some pretty serious flooding and things like that. But a hurricane, I've never experienced that, and I've got some folks. I think a gal that played softball for you with Jessica lives down in New Orleans, and she just hunkers down whenever it's coming through, and it floods like crazy, and they just deal with it.
That's what I remember those folks were like in Biloxi. But again, Carmen veered off more toward New Orleans, so we didn't get right at the blunt of it. But
Yeah.
those people in Biloxi, they didn't seem to get too excited about the whole thing.
Right.
I did.
Right. Yeah, I would imagine so, and just even more so, I think about those folks that live on islands.
Oh yeah,
That would
yeah,
trip me out. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So that's your training experience or your post, and then you say your regular station was going to be in North Carolina. Um, I think that's probably a good place for us to stop for today and maybe transition into next time. But was there any kind of break in between that? Did you get to go home at all for a little bit? And when I say home, Middle Tennessee before North Carolina, or was it just kind of one to the other?
Yeah, it was one to the other. I may have spent the night, so I don't remember having any major break.
Okay. Okay. And where in North Carolina were you stationed at?
It was at the time Pope Air Force Base, which was part of the Fort Bragg complex, which is in Fayetteville, North Carolina.
Okay.
Uh,
Cool.
we were up there. Well, Rachel and I went up there a few years ago, and uh, Pope Air Force Base is no longer an Air Force base. It's all part of the Army complex. And I think the military has put together a number of another bases and made them joint bases rather than separate. I remember we were in Seattle last summer. I noticed that about Fort Lewis. There's another Air Force base. I think I forget the name, but it's all one complex now. So.
Right. And is it in North Carolina that you pick up your academic pursuits?
Correct.
Okay, cool, cool. Yeah, I'd like to get into that another time so we can really dig deeper in that. And based on our conversation today, if you'd be interested in it, man, I think we almost have a whole nother conversation or another pathway, another conversation to be had, maybe in civics.
Okay.
So maybe both of us let's brainstorm on that a little bit, and in between time we'll kind of talk about that a little bit.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
on this line, we're just going to keep on going with what we're doing here.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Cool.
I'm
Hey, Pops,
enjoying it.
I really appreciate it, man. This is it's really an honor for me to do this. I really appreciate you so much, and I value you so much.
Well, I am thrilled that you want to have this conversation.
Yeah. It's important. It's important not just for us. It's an important conversation for our family. It's an important conversation for our communities, our home communities of Cleveland and Lebanon. You know, we both hold those very strong, and for Laverne and Smyrna and all our folks. But it's also an important conversation for the state of Tennessee, and it's an important conversation for this country as a whole. So I just really appreciate you.
Well, thank you.
All right, this has been Family Talk with my partner Wayne Carter. I am Maxwell 3000. This is Maxwell 3000 Productions. Peace and love.